When a young California girl goes missing and her mom is found murdered, one family seems to be at the center of it all. From a self-declared street preacher to a babysitter with a murderous past, a host of suspicious individuals haunt the story of a missing child who investigators believe is still alive in this episode of Last Seen Alive. Thanks for listening to Last Seen Alive. I'm your host, Leah, crime analyst by day and true crime storyteller by night.
And as always, I'm your co-host, Scott.
This is the revisited and enhanced edition of one of our early episodes, which features the cases of Nikki and Arianna Fitts. The original edition was recorded in 2020, and we've revisited and re-recorded an episode on their cases in 2025. As I'm sure those of you who've been listening since the early days of Last Seen Alive have noticed, our production and audio quality has improved significantly over the years. Lately, we've been working on remaking our earlier episodes. When we originally recorded them, we were doing the best we knew how at the time. However, our best was not the best, and we've learned a lot since then. We want to honor those victims by telling their stories with the production quality they deserve. So, we've been completely remaking all of our early episodes. I'm talking totally new recordings with any new info or updates included, and we'll be releasing these episodes on what were previously our off Mondays. So, that means there will be an episode of Last Seen Alive airing every single Monday. It'll alternate between totally new cases we've never covered before, as usual, and revisited and remade episodes on the Mondays in between.
Yeah, it's definitely opening up a really unique opportunity for us to revisit, update, and re-experience some of our older cases again.
It does, and since it's been years, many of these cases do have some updates, whether small or large, that we're able to include. So let's get into Nikki and Arianna's story. Nicole Fitts, who went by Nikki, was last seen alive on April 1st, 2016. She was 32 years old and lived in California's Bay Area. Her 32 years of life had been marked by hardship that had sharpened rather than dulled her best traits. According to her sisters, growing up, she'd always been someone who'd looked out for others, especially her sisters, which was something they appreciated, especially since, when they were all teenagers growing up in Southern California, their mom died. She'd been a single mom, so that made the girls orphans. The sisters were split up among multiple caregivers, but made it a point to remain in communication with each other, managing to maintain a close bond despite their physical separation. At the time, no one knew that certain defining moments of Nikki's adult life would one day closely mirror her mother's. They did, though, starting with parenthood. When Nikki was in her late teens, she became a mom for the first time, giving birth to a daughter who she named Cindy. Like her own mother had been, Nikki was a single mom, and a young one at that. Nikki's caring nature multiplied exponentially when she became a mom. She was always doing her best to make sure everyone in her life was taken care of, sometimes to a fault. Basically, in order to stop Nikki from taking care of her family, you would have had to stop her heart from beating. And that's exactly what someone did. Before that, though, predictably, single motherhood was full of challenges, especially financially. Because of this, when Cindy was a preteen, Nikki and Cindy moved in with Nikki's sister, Tess, and Tess's girlfriend. The four of them shared a home in Pacifica, California, which is on the coast just south of San Francisco. The area is bordered by sweeping coastlines, state parks, and rocky beaches where the sun sets into rolling waves each evening. As you might expect, it is not a cheap place to live. Today, the median home price is about $1.5 million.
Yeah, it really does sound like quite the lovely place to go.
Yeah, it sounds lovely, and it also sounds out of many people's budgets. Despite the cost of living in Pacifica, the three women chose to reside there together in a small home because nearby San Francisco was even more expensive. Unfortunately, though, no matter how hard they all tried, they just couldn't keep up with the high cost of living. Even with their combined incomes, they eventually found themselves struggling to pay the rent, and their dreams of maintaining a happy home together dissolved as the struggle of scraping by paycheck to paycheck, never quite having enough, took its toll. To make things even more challenging, during this time, Nikki became pregnant again with her second child, and eventually the dream of the happy family home in Pacifica flatlined. Tess and her girlfriend moved further south to Santa Cruz, where the cost of living, and especially of housing, was lower. Nikki didn't want to leave the Bay Area, but she just couldn't afford the cost of living there. Because of this, she ended up in a homeless women's shelter. In order to spare her older daughter, Cindy, who was by then 13 years old, from homelessness, Nikki sent her to live with her father in Southern California. Although it pained her to be separated from her child, she thought that that was what was best for Cindy, and that was what mattered most. Facing homelessness is hard enough for an adult. It was not an experience she wanted her teenage daughter to have to endure.
Yeah, it really is a selfless move to put the needs of your child first in that situation. I know when you're struggling to hold on to any semblance of life that you have, that would be a devastating position and decision to have to make. But I do think she made the best choice for Cindy in that situation.
Definitely, and I'm sure it was very difficult. Cindy had never been apart from her before that, so I'm sure it was a tough decision to make. By that time, though, Cindy actually was not Nikki's only child. She'd given birth to a second daughter who she named Arianna. Sending Arianna to live with her father was not an option, so Arianna, still just an infant, lived at the shelter with Nikki. And it was while living in the shelter that Nikki met someone who would drastically alter the course of her life and her daughter's lives. That someone was Lemasani Briggs, a middle-aged woman who described herself as an evangelical street pastor.
The entire Lemasani saga just flashed through my head.
Yep, we're going to cover it again, and it did not get any better with time. Lemasani offered to let Nikki and Arianna live with her, and Nikki gratefully accepted the offer. After all, she had a baby to care for, and living with Lemasani had to be better than living in a shelter, right? So Nikki moved in with Lemasani. With a roof over her head and a new job at Best Buy, she'd gone from homeless to employed and housed. Huge steps forward, or so she thought. Now, to be clear here, Nikki wasn't being supported financially by Lemasani or relying on her generosity. She was a paying tenant in Lemasani's home, a roommate.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, just about all of her financial went towards staying with Lemasani, correct?
Yeah, it quickly escalated to that point. So Nikki also paid Lemasani to care for Arianna while she was at work. It seemed like a fairly equitable arrangement at first, but then Lemasani raised her babysitting rate and the rent. These increased costs were more than Nikki could afford with her modest retail workers' pay. As a result, the relationship became strained. Lemasani was demanding more than Nikki had to give, and Lemasani knew it. Because she couldn't afford Lemasani's increased rates, Nikki had to find other babysitters. The babysitters she found, two women named Helena Martin and Ciolo Hearn, weren't strangers. They were actually Lemasani's nieces. Oddly, though, they were basically estranged from their aunt Lemasani. So how Nikki wound up meeting them, if they were estranged from Lemasani, I don't really know. I've never quite understood that element of the arrangement. But that's what various news sources, such as Nuala Sawyer Bashari's reporting for SF Weekly, report. Now, in any case, Helena and Ciolo were willing to provide childcare for a more reasonable price than Lemasani was demanding, and Nikki really couldn't afford to turn them down. When Nikki's sister and her partner heard about this, they were dismayed. Nikki had told them about how Lemasani was treating her poorly, and they really didn't think it was a good idea for her to involve herself with any additional members of Lemasani's family, even if they didn't get along with each other. They were worried that Lemasani's nieces might take advantage of her too, but Nikki, who had always been somewhat naive and perhaps too eager to give people the benefit of the doubt, was not dissuaded. Still, the money Nikki saved on childcare was consumed by the continued rent increases Lemasani kept imposing. Eventually, Nikki was turning over her entire paycheck to Lemasani to cover the ever-rising rent. Once again, Nikki had found herself in an unaffordable living situation. The situation wasn't just unaffordable, though. It was also exploitative and downright weird.
Yeah, definitely not what she was expecting when she decided to accept the offer of this street preacher.
Yeah, definitely not. According to Nikki's sister, Tess, the problems between Nikki and Lemasani were more than just financial. At one point, Nikki told Tess that she suspected Lemasani of violating her privacy by going through her belongings when she wasn't home. Nikki also told Tess that although she was forking over every dollar she earned to Lemasani for rent, she'd never been given a key to the shared home. She couldn't even get inside unless someone was there to let her in, which meant that she was sometimes locked out of her own house, the house she was giving up every penny she had to call home.
This is definitely an abuser that is taking everything she can and exploiting this entire situation. She knows exactly what she's doing. I'd be shocked if this was the first time she's done this.
I agree. Now, according to that SF Weekly article I mentioned, Tess has also said that Nikki showed her verbally abusive texts that she'd received from Lamasani, in which the other woman called her names and berated her for her personal choices. Eventually, Tess, who'd always thought of Nikki as her younger sister, despite the fact that she was actually a little older, had had enough. It was clear that Nikki was being taken advantage of, and she wasn't going to stand for it. She and her girlfriend drove north to San Francisco, determined to rescue Nikki from her dysfunctional living situation. And they succeeded. Once again, Nikki was living with her youngest sister and her girlfriend. And once again, things weren't easy. Living in Santa Cruz meant that Nikki had to commute 2 hours each way just to work her low-paying retail job at Best Buy.
She's just in one hard place after another.
Yeah.
You really feel for her.
I do. Sometimes Nikki would crash at friends' houses during the week to avoid making the drive all the way back to Tess's place. Her biggest problems in life, though, didn't involve money directly. Her biggest problems involved her daughters. Because of her new living arrangements, she was forced to leave Arianna with her babysitters more often and for longer periods of time, including overnight stays. And on top of that, Child Protective Services had removed her older daughter, Cindy, from her father's home. Unbeknownst to Nikki, the living conditions there had not been suitable. In response, Nikki immediately threw herself into the legal fight for custody of Cindy, traveling to LA on her days off from work to appear in court. Fighting for the daughters she rarely got to see, all while trying to keep a steady paycheck coming in, was absolutely exhausting. On top of that, Nikki was picking up all the extra shifts she could get, working herself ragged so that she could save up for a better living situation for herself and her daughters. As she did this, barely balancing all these challenging aspects of her life, she realized that something wasn't right. She was still using Helena and Ciolo as babysitters for Arianna, and although they were estranged from their aunt Lamasani, Nikki soon began to feel that the apples hadn't fallen far from the family tree and that she was being taken advantage of again. Her new babysitters were demanding something she couldn't give, much as Lamasani had. However, they weren't asking for money. They wanted something far more valuable. They wanted Arianna. More on that next. And now, back to Nikki and Arianna's stories. As Nikki burnt the candle at both ends, desperately traveling between extra work shift and custody hearings, she realized that her babysitters seemed overly attached to her toddler daughter, Arianna. Scott, I think it's worth mentioning that Arianna was an especially cute kid. She had these perfectly chubby cheeks, huge eyes, curly hair, and an adorable smile. She was just irresistibly precious, and everywhere she went, people who met her seemed to fall in love with her. Apparently, her babysitters, Helena and Ciolo, were no exception. In the months leading up to Nikki's death, between working extra hours to save up for a home of her own and constantly driving back and forth to LA for court, Nikki hadn't been able to spend much time with Arianna, which pained her, but she had to do what she had to do for her family. The only way she'd ever have the money to fight for custody of Cindy and get a home of her own for herself and her daughters would be if she worked for it. Really, really hard. She pulled as many shifts as she could get and rarely had a chance to rest. This meant that Arianna had been spending a lot of time with her babysitters, Helena and Ciolo, and apparently they didn't want to give her back. This, of course, was a problem, especially since a coworker of Nikki's had generously offered to let her and Arianna live with her as roommates. Nikki was ecstatic. Her coworker lived near the store where they both worked, so finally, Nikki would be able to work without having to choose between sacrificing 4 hours a day to commuting or crashing alone on a friend's couch. The offer from her coworker was the best thing that had happened to her in a long time, so she immediately began purchasing items for Arianna to enjoy in the home they'd soon be moving into. But not everyone was as thrilled with the news as Nikki. On one particular day when Nikki was supposed to pick up Arianna from her babysitters, she was told that she couldn't because they'd taken Arianna to Disneyland without Nikki's permission or any sort of heads up whatsoever. And that's a tough situation to be in as a parent, because if you make a big deal out of it, then you feel like you're the bad guy who ruined your child's trip to Disneyland. I think they were very intentionally manipulating her with that.
From the very beginning, there was some level of manipulation going on.
It definitely seems like it. Now, this whole Disneyland denial thing really angered Nikki, who by this point felt as if the babysitters were trying to force her out of her own daughter's life. The harder she worked to make a better life for her daughters, the less she got to see them. Even when she managed to make time to spend with Arianna, Helena and Ciolo came up with some new way, some new excuse to keep her from her. These instances, including the Disneyland incident, only served to motivate Nikki even more to move Arianna into their new home. As she worked toward that goal, approximately 6 weeks went by, during which the babysitters refused to let Nikki see her daughter at all.
At that point, you have to question, is my daughter even safe or okay? This is
right.
Extreme behavior.
Very. Now, April 1st, 2016, the last day Nikki was seen alive, is when things started to get really strange. The day started out ordinarily enough. Nikki went shopping with a friend from work who was buying clothes for a new job, and it was during this time that she withdrew several $100s from an ATM. No one knows what the money was for. She didn't say much about it to her friend, and shortly after that, she returned home. At home, she was watching a movie with her roommate when someone called her on her cell phone. She answered, and when the conversation was over, she told her roommate she needed to run to a local restaurant on a quick errand, but that she'd be right back. She even wanted her roommate to pause the movie until she returned. The trip was supposed to be that quick. Now, when we originally covered this case years ago, we weren't certain who Nikki had gone to meet. However, in the years since, the San Francisco Police Department has publicly revealed that Nikki was going to the restaurant with the intention of meeting one or more of her daughter's babysitters. So either Helena, Ciolo, or both. We know that for sure now.
Yeah, I remember we originally theorized that it may be some sort of ransom payoff.
Right. Yeah, we could only theorize and speculate then, but now it's known. That's who she was going to meet. Nikki's roommate, who knew all about how problematic Helena and Ciolo were, begged Nikki to get the police involved if she was going to meet with them. She did not want Nikki to go alone.
With clear reason.
Right. Unfortunately, Nikki wouldn't take her advice. Probably she was just desperate to get Arianna, who by this point she hadn't seen in a month and a half, back, and too desperate really to worry about her own safety or maybe think as clearly as her roommate was. And as a parent, that's understandable. I would be desperate too in her shoes. So she left the apartment without contacting the police, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. That night, back at their shared apartment, her roommate eventually fell asleep. When she woke up the next day, she was still alone in the apartment. There was no sign of Nikki. However, when she looked at her phone, she saw that Nikki had sent her a text at some point during the night. The message said only that she'd gone to Fresno with someone named Sam, which was weird because her roommate had never heard her mention anybody by that name.
Yeah, and it's a direct conflict with what she had just told her roommate about pausing the movie.
Right. Now, even weirder, Nikki had made a post to her Facebook page at 1:13 a.m. It said, quote, "Spending time with my 3-year-old, need this break," end quote. That's break spelled incorrectly, B-R-A-K-E, like car brakes. Now, for some people, that might be normal, but this was strange for several reasons in this case. One, because Arianna was not 3, she was 2.5. And I think that almost anyone will agree that when a child is that young, parents tend to be very specific when stating their age. It's not normal to round up, especially a whole 6 months.
For parents, no.
Right. Now, secondly, there was no punctuation whatsoever in the Facebook post, and the word break was spelled incorrectly. Nikki, who had been a notorious teacher's pet as a child, never would have dreamed of posting a status containing such an error. To her, those kind of spelling slip-ups would have been the equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. Lastly, I'm sure everyone listening who has any experience with young children is wondering, who spends time with a toddler at 1:13 a.m.?
No one that wants to. If you're up with a toddler at 1:13 a.m., it is because they have been crying or they are not sleeping. It is not a fun break, car or otherwise.
Right. Toddlers are usually asleep during that time, and if they're awake, they're probably not in a stellar mood. Like you said, hanging out with a sleep-deprived, cranky toddler is not a break by any stretch of the imagination. Now, that strange Facebook post was the last anyone ever heard from Nikki, or I should probably say, heard from whoever was pretending to be Nikki online. Nikki didn't show up for work the next day or the next, which of course was very out of character. Nikki's sisters and Claire, Tess's girlfriend, knew that there was no way Nikki had disappeared on her own. Tess immediately began looking into the matter herself, scraping together whatever information she could and trying to figure out what could have happened to Nikki. She quickly started to suspect that Arianna's babysitters, Helena and Ciolo, had had something to do with Nikki's unexplained disappearance. After all, it wasn't just Nikki who was missing. Arianna was unaccounted for too. And the really weird thing was, Helena and Ciolo, who'd been so attached to the little girl, didn't seem worried at all as far as Tess could tell. Tess, naturally, found this incredibly suspicious. Tess, Claire, and Nikki's other sister flew north to San Francisco, where Tess spoke to police, filing a missing persons report with the San Francisco Police Department. She even mentioned her suspicions about Helena and Ciolo to officers, although she had little information on them to give other than their names and addresses. Not content to simply rely on police, over the course of the following week, Tess continued her own relentless investigation into what had happened to her sister and niece. She scrutinized Nikki's social media and spoke to anyone and everyone she could think of who she thought might know something. And then, finally, she received a call from investigators who asked her to meet with them at the Hall of Justice in San Francisco. The invitation was a relief to Tess. Despite her extensive efforts, she was no closer to locating Nikki. She needed help. However, when she arrived and investigators told her they'd found Nikki, she instantly knew they had not found her alive. McLaren Park covers more than 300 acres of southeastern San Francisco. It contains an amphitheater, a pool, and a golf course, among other recreational amenities. Mostly, though, it's full of towering trees and vast yellow expanses of unmown meadow. Within the city, dog walkers and after-work adventurers can rack up steps on walking trails and even take short hikes. Thanks to the seclusion offered by the oasis of urban wilderness, though, the park has a bit of a reputation. Nikki's body wasn't the first to be dumped within the bounds of McLaren Park, so maybe it wasn't completely shocking to the general public when she was found there. For Nikki's family, though, it was a brutal revelation. Tess's girlfriend, Claire, would describe the news of Nikki's death as blindsiding to journalist Nwala Sawyer-Bashari, who wrote a piece on the case for SF Weekly. Whoever had abandoned Nikki in the park had dug a shallow grave, folded her petite body into the fetal position, and then covered her with a plywood board. When her body was found there in that shallow grave, she was wearing the same blue Best Buy uniform shirt she'd had on the night of April 1st, when she'd disappeared going out to meet either Helena, Ciolo, or both. The plywood board that had covered her body bore a symbol that somebody had sprayed on sloppily with gray paint. Police eventually released a photo of the board to the public, hoping that someone would recognize the distinctive symbol that had been spray painted onto it. Investigators don't believe that the board originated from within the park. They think that whoever dumped Nikki's remains there brought the board in themselves. And they hope that being able to identify its source will provide insight into who left Nikki there. So on that note, you can see a photo of the board on our website. Please check it out. The link is in this episode's show notes. And Scott, I'm going to show you a picture right now. Any ideas on what that symbol may represent?
So it looks kind of like an angry washing machine.
You know what? That's actually a good description.
Honestly, it reminds me of just spray paint over spray. I don't think it necessarily has any specific meaning. It reminds me of when I paint like model cars or something and you're using spray paint and it just sprays over and it leaves that imprint of whatever was on it. But it really does look like an angry washing machine.
You know, that's a good point. This may not be an intentional design. The best way I can describe it is it's a square with another square-ish shape inside of it and two
ears?
Yeah, it looks like ears. It kind of looks like the outline of the cartoon character Jake's head from Adventure Time.
Yeah, that's also a good way to put it.
So I don't know what it means, if anything, possibly nothing like you said. In any case, at this point, you are probably wondering how Nikki was killed. I can't answer that question, though, because that information still hasn't been made public for the sake of the investigation. Regardless of method, though, we do know that Nikki was murdered. The police have made that very clear. And the San Francisco Police Department took what had happened to Nikki seriously. After all, not only had she been murdered, but her 2.5-year-old daughter was still nowhere to be found. Police worked to find the toddler, believing that she was still alive, and to solve Nikki's murder, knowing that answers to one of those crimes would almost certainly lead to answers regarding the other. Nikki's death and her daughter's disappearance were intimately entwined. Perhaps whoever had killed Nikki had done so because they wanted Arianna for themselves.
It's highly likely.
Yeah. Additionally, it wasn't just the San Francisco Police Department who were involved in the investigation. This was a multi-departmental affair, and agencies investigating the homicide and disappearance included the FBI. The investigation was so extensive, in fact, that according to major news outlets like ABC, over 30,000 individual pieces of evidence were collected during its course. Now, I cannot continue without stopping to address the sheer magnitude of that number. 30,000 pieces of evidence for one investigation, even a combined homicide/likely kidnapping, is staggering.
My question always is, are those physical pieces of evidence, or do they include like a digital catalog of all the photographs that they took?
I assume they're including a digital catalog of photographs in that, but I don't know for sure. I just know that I can tell you from experience, having managed my department's evidence in the past, that 30,000 pieces of evidence for a single case is abnormally huge.
It's massive.
Yeah. Needless to say, if 30,000 items were collected, or even if that was a typo and it was really 3,000, some serious effort was put into this investigation. Anyway, among locations police searched were the homes of Ciolo, Helena, and Helena's husband, David. The police obtained warrants to search the homes, so Ciolo, Helena, and David had no choice but to stand back and allow it to happen. Overall, though, it's reported that all three of them have refused to cooperate with the investigation.
I wonder why.
Yeah. Although their reportedly uncooperative behavior and seeming lack of concern over Nikki's death and Arianna's disappearance is suspicious, none of these three individuals have been charged so far with anything in relation to this case. However, during the early stages of the investigation, it quickly came to light that one of Arianna's babysitters, Helena, had a criminal history that neither Nikki nor her sisters had had any idea about. And if they had known about it, they probably wouldn't have let Helena anywhere near Arianna. And that's because Helena is a convicted killer. When Helena was 18 years old, she shot and killed the father of one of her children, and for that crime, she spent a total of 6 years in prison. So, Nikki had unknowingly been letting a convicted murderer care for her child, and that murderer, along with Ciolo, hadn't wanted to give Arianna back to her mother. Was it possible that she'd been willing to kill again in order to get and keep what she wanted?
I mean, I wouldn't put it past a convicted murderer.
Nor would I. When police searched Helena and Ciolo's homes, they didn't find Arianna, nor did they find evidence that would be sufficient to charge either of the women with anything in relation to Arianna's disappearance. Scott, remember how Nikki's roommate received that weird text on the night of her disappearance, ostensibly from Nikki saying that she'd gone out of town with someone named Sam?
Yeah, the one that we can almost confirm wasn't from her.
Right. Well, for the record, it's been years now, and investigators have never been able to locate any evidence suggesting that Nikki knew anyone named Sam. So, big surprise, Sam probably doesn't exist, and Nikki probably wasn't the one who'd texted her roommate claiming she was going to Fresno with Sam. Someone else, presumably her killer, had likely used her phone to send the text. As for what happened when Nikki went to meet with Arianna's babysitter, or babysitters, some people speculate that they lured her there by telling her she could have Arianna back if she paid them, which might account for the several $100s she'd withdrawn from her bank account earlier that day.
To this day, that is still my leading theory that I subscribe to.
I think it's a very strong theory. Now, of course, this line of speculation goes on to suggest that the promise was a ruse and that after luring Nikki there, they killed her. There's lots of online speculation from the public suggesting that Helena and Ciolo might have done that so that they could keep Arianna for themselves. Others speculate that the babysitters had kept Arianna from her mother for 6 weeks because they'd killed her, whether accidentally or intentionally, and were trying to cover it up. Then, when they couldn't stall any longer, they killed Nikki, too.
I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of the two. It's very possible that they could have accidentally or intentionally killed Arianna and then brought up this ruse of a ransom, essentially, and then killed Nikki.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the logic behind both of these theories. Now, as for investigators, they believe Arianna may still be alive. In fact, just a few weeks before we recorded this episode, an FBI assistant special agent from the San Francisco field office made a statement telling media the following, quote, "We operate under the assumption that Arianna is alive, and we investigate with that in mind. So our goal is to find Arianna, recover her, and reunite her with her family," end quote. Now, when it comes to the investigation, we know that in 2017, a year after Nikki's death, investigators found compelling evidence in the form of a car that they seized with the intention to search for DNA evidence. The results of that forensic examination have not been made known to the public yet, but it's believed that the vehicle is associated with Nikki's murder and Arianna's disappearance. And this is where we left off during our original release of this episode. However, there have been some developments in this case, which is still being actively investigated since then. For starters, Helena Ciolo and Helena's husband, David, her current husband, not the man she murdered, to be clear, have relocated to Las Vegas, where they all live together. And Nikki's sister, Tess, put up a billboard in Vegas featuring Arianna's age-progressed photo. She did so because she believes that Helena, Ciolo, and David murdered Nikki and were responsible for Arianna's disappearance. As for what investigators believe, well, in February of 2022, journalist Vanessa Murphy asked an FBI spokesperson whether or not Arianna's babysitters were persons of interest in relation to her disappearance. And that spokesperson, Catherine Zackel, responded with the following, quote, "I can't talk about any specific individuals in this case due to FBI policy, but what I will say is that we believe that there are multiple people who know more information than they have shared with law enforcement," end quote. The San Francisco Police Department, however, has been a little more candid with their public statements regarding this case. Here's a quote from their official missing person poster/crime bulletin for this case. Quote, "The investigation revealed that Nikki Fitts received a phone call on April 1st, 2016 at approximately 2100 hours. That call lured her out of her residence to go meet the babysitter. Nikki was never seen alive again," end quote. Additionally, since our original coverage of this case, the amount of the reward money being offered in exchange for information leading to answers has been raised significantly. Originally, Nikki's employer, Best Buy, offered a $10,000 reward, but in March of 2023, the San Francisco Police Department announced that they themselves are offering a staggering $250,000 reward for, quote, "information leading to the identification, arrest, and conviction of the person or persons responsible for Nikki's murder and Arianna's disappearance," end quote. And that reward is still being offered at the time of this recording.
That is a staggering amount.
Yeah, that's life-changing money. So if someone has a tip and they come forward to investigators now, not only will they be changing the life of a family who've been deprived of a child they loved, they will be changing their own life because this is serious money.
$10,000 on its own is enough to change a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, let alone $250,000. The reason that SFPD is offering such an enormous amount of money is simple. Investigators believe that Arianna is probably still alive, probably being raised under another name, and they want to find her to ensure her safety and to reunite her with her family. So please, no matter where you live, take a look at the brand new age-progressed image of Arianna we've got up on our website. The link is in the episode's show notes. At the time of this recording in early 2025, Arianna is 11 years old. She'll turn 12 on September 6th, 2025. The age-progressed image we have up, which was just released a few weeks ago, shows her at her current age of 11. Again, please take a look. Arianna could be living down the street from you or going to school with your kids, and she deserves to be reunited with her family. If you have any information related to the death of Nikki Fitts and or the disappearance of Arianna Fitts, please call the San Francisco Police Department at 415-575-4444 or the FBI San Francisco Field Office at 415-553-7400. And if you found this episode to be of special interest, you may want to listen to our episode on the unsolved double homicide of Neil and Brandon Abernathy. Their case isn't related to Arianna's, but both cases occurred in California's Bay Area and involved the victimization of a parent and child. We aired our episode on Neil and Brandon's case in December of 2023. You can scroll back to then in our feed to listen if you'd like.
That's all for this episode of Lasting Alive. Thanks for listening. Make sure you check our website, lastingalivepodcast.com, for photos from the story and links to the sources we used to write it. While you're at it, follow us on Insta and Twitter at LSA Podcast. Episodes of Last Seen Alive air every Monday. See you then. And if you think bringing unsolved cases like Nikki and Arianna's to the public's attention is important, please take a moment to rate or review Last Seen Alive and tell your friends to check us out too. Also, don't forget to check out our merch store where you can get an LSA t-shirt or hoodie. We donate 50% of the proceeds from every sale to the DNA Doe Project. Last Seen Alive is written and researched by you, Leah. Audio engineering and editing is provided by me, Scott.